Hello and welcome to Edison TV. Today I'm joined by Newhouse and Sanjay Jawa from Kooth. Kooth is a digital mental health platform serving children, young people and adults with growing traction across the US and the UK. Kate, many thanks for joining today.
Thank you.
And can we start off by looking at 2025? You've described the year as an important year of consolidation. Can you discuss, I guess, the key proof points of your model that you've developed over the course of the year?
Yes, certainly. Obviously, it's our 25th birthday this year, so we have multiple proof points across the whole of the UK, where we're the largest youth provider of digital mental health. Over in the US, we're in 2025, that was our second year of full operation across California, where we're delivering to 6 million 13 to 25-year-olds with our Soluna platform. And some very important key proof points there is obviously delivering to users across the state, meeting the objectives of our commissioner, so that's the Department of Healthcare Services in California. And those include reaching people earlier in their healthcare journey, reaching those that otherwise would not have access to anything if it wasn't for Soluna, and reaching those people that are in highest areas of health inequality across the state. We have delivered against all of those key objectives, and really importantly to deliver to a large population, because we know that the need is high. So again, surpassing our department expectations in terms of usage, where we penetrated 1 in 41 of the population across the state of California. And importantly, and I've talked about this a lot, it's important that we are part of the system and that we work alongside the other provision that happens across a population. So importantly, working with healthcare organisations, education organisations and the community to really showcase how Soluna is valuable to them, so that they can be key advocates and that they can be key referrers into our platform for the young people that they also serve. So those are two key elements of the proof points. And then I'm really excited to share that we've got the results of an independent evaluation of Soluna in California by the very prestigious Northwestern University. They have come out with, and it's just gone to preprint, their evaluation showing that there is significant and sustained reductions in psychological distress across a 3-month period. I'll go into a little bit more detail of that, but that's really important to showcase that independent evaluation that it works. So it's scalable, it's cost effective, it works. And then again, showing that we can replicate that model in new states as we move outside of California, so in New Jersey and Michigan.
Thank you. And then just digging into the Californian implementation in a bit more detail, you've highlighted your systems integration, your integration to the system as being a sort of key goal for yourselves and a key driver of the business going forward. Can you discuss that and any other sort of particular proof points that you've seen coming out of California?
Yeah, it's an important part of becoming a sort of sustained and sustainable part of the healthcare system, is to show your value to other parts of that system and to show how you fit into it. So a key part of how we do that is together with our team. So we have engagement leads that work sort of field workers within the system. And then we also have an ambassador program. So we have youth ambassadors, we have parent and carer ambassadors, we have educator ambassadors, and we work with those and throughout the state with key healthcare organisations, education organisations and community organisations, so they can understand the value of Soluna and they can work with us and we can integrate with them. So some key proof points of that, illustrating that success of the work that we have done in state, is at the end of 2025 in December, the LA County Board of Supervisors, so LA County is the largest county across California, and actually it's larger than a number of other US states. They signed a motion mandating all of their youth-facing services to report back on how they are embedding Soluna into their services. So again, that's a good kind of structural indicator of how we're embedding within the system. Similarly, another sort of key proof point is the State Education Department and the State Healthcare Department co-signing a letter to every single local education authority across the state of California, again showcasing California as a state-vetted, state-supported, free support that they can use within their systems, and really showing how to embed Soluna into their care pathways within schools.
And turning to elsewhere in the US, you've been building out in the State Alliance model that you announced a number of months ago, wins in New Jersey and Michigan.
Yeah.
Firstly, can you remind us what the State Alliance model involves, and then, just discuss the key, the key, what we should be looking for in terms of how you build that pipeline.
Yeah, so as a reminder of what the State Alliance model is, this is where we're focusing on building a kind of networked continuum of care. What does that mean? That means that we have government funding that unlocks kind of population-wide access to Soluna. And then we're developing our partnerships that we have with other funders in the state. So that might include Medicaid managed care organisations, large school districts, colleges, universities, where they over time will then pay for their more targeted support for their covered populations. So it's a kind of combined funding model as you expand out from that initial state-funded model, where typically you'll cover a certain proportion of children and young people. So as you mentioned, in New Jersey, we cover 50,000 13 to 18-year-olds across 4 counties. And in Michigan, where we're about to go live, we cover 100,000. Actually, it's not defined by geographical area. And so if we look at how we then unlock that go-to-market model, from the get-go, you're establishing those partnerships where you want them to understand how Soluna is used and how they can benefit their users, and they can refer people into the Soluna platform. And then over time, you're converting them into paying sort of funders. And then if we look at New Jersey and Michigan specifically, so we've renewed New Jersey at the end of last year. We're seeing similar kind of proof points to California, where over half of our coaching interactions that happen in New Jersey are outside school hours. So really showcasing the need for that on-demand, outside of traditional 9 to 5, Monday to Friday provision that really, doesn't exist very much across the US, and really showing again that importance of user satisfaction as well, and seeing that over 95% of our users come to the platform and get what they need on that first use case. In Michigan, very much we're just about to go live, but we're really meeting the need. So this is sort of talking to the kind of market context of the shortage of demand within the more traditional model of provision that exists. So typically, you would expect to have one school counsellor or psychologist for every 500 students. And we know that there's an overwhelming demand, and the supply is not being able to meet that. So in Michigan, we can see that it's almost one school psychologist for every 1,500. So again, to be able to deliver at scale through that digital model, again, outside of those more traditional hours, and it being accessible, reducing barriers to access, is that really important kind of model that we're seeing.
And turning to the UK, obviously there's pressure on the NHS, but you've seen resilient performance, I think, through diversifying your funding sources. Can you discuss that? And also, as I understand, you're migrating your UK customer base to the Soluna platform. Can you discuss the implications of that move? Yeah.
Certainly. So yeah, you're right. We have been under sustained NHS budget pressures over the last few years. And so it was a significant and deliberate strategic priority in the middle of last year to look to diversify our funding outside of the NHS. And this includes Department of Work and Pensions, local authorities and public health. In particular, Department of Work and Pensions, and this really recognises the need for mental health support for those that are not in education, employment and training. So there's some really quite shocking statistics that some 900,000 young people between the ages of 16 to 25 are out of education, employment and training in the UK. And actually, even if you look at school-age children, there's still 20% are persistently absent from school. It's come down a little bit from COVID, where it was just post-COVID, it was 24%, but it's double pre-COVID figures. So there's a really strong recognition that for the economic productivity of our country, that really meeting the needs of those mental health requirements for children and young people is a economic necessity, if not an individual and societal one. And so we're increasingly seeing the commitment for that through the Treasury and to DWP funding. So we secured 3 DWP co-funded contracts at the back end of last year, and are moving into going live with those contracts over the next few months. So we really see that as a key kind of growth lever as we move into 2027. When we look at our existing kind of more traditional kind of children, young people, whole population covered contracts, we see across 2025 a stabilisation of that model, where when we come to renewal, still over half of our contracts expand upon renewal. I would see, as we're bringing Soluna back to the UK, and Soluna had a big investment in terms of the development of it, and we've taken our 25 years of experience from the UK and now the US, coupled with significant work that California had done across covered populations and with young people, to really make that an engaging and personalised platform. So we see bringing that back to the UK, which is a significant internal project to migrate all of our existing contracts onto the Soluna platform. We see that there'll be higher usage of our platform. That, coupled with what I'm hoping to see with the 10-year mental health strategy that's coming later this summer in this year, followed by the budget in October. Finally, that recognition of moving funding more into the digital and prevention and out of hospital care, which has been very much flagged as key priorities for the government. So moving into 2027, seeing our ability to be able to expand, because we know that the need is there. On any one year, sort of 1 in 7, 1 in 8 of the population require our support, and we're covering on average about 1 in 40. So we know that we can deliver more. We just need that sort of funding to come down the line to be able to match that.
And turning towards artificial intelligence, it's a hugely emotive subject in the field of this mental health care. But you've outlined a differentiated, clinically governed solution based on your own proprietary data. Can you discuss that and why that should deliver significantly more benefits than risk, I guess, and how should we expect that to be rolled out in the future?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, the sector, legislators and regulators alike are extremely wary of general purpose AI in the field of youth behavioural health, and quite rightly so. There have been some particularly devastating use cases. What it does show in terms of children, young people turning to the likes of general LLM models, and they are doing so, it shows the need for having that on-demand support, and potentially, meets some of the naysayers that you need to wait a long time and have those sort of diagnostic challenges to be able to before you can get any support. It really shows that there's a pull on that on-demand support. But we certainly have that, what we would consider a structural advantage. So we are looking at how we deploy AI using both a data moat and a regulatory moat. And what do we mean by that? So we have 20 years worth of data of clinically governed clinician and user interactions. So over 2.5 million clinical case notes, over 500,000 interactions between practitioner and our users. That is all within our clinical governance model. So this is not web scrape data. It is data that is according to a very robust clinical governance model. And then the way that we are then using that is, again, through remaining human at the heart and really treasuring that human to human interaction and really enhancing the efficiency of that model so that practitioners are spending their valuable time with our users rather than on administrative tasks or anything like that. And then we look at where we're sitting from a regulatory perspective. So if you look out in the non-sector or in the sector, essentially they will be regulated out of supporting, in particular, under 18s. And you can see that across the states with governors and legislators literally outlawing the use of LLMs and chatbots for under 18s. You might have seen last week, Google actually announced that where there would be relational triggers through using Gemini, they will be signposted out into state or national endorsed mental health support. So you're seeing from a regulation perspective, that, as I said, non-sector experts will be kind of regulated out. And then when we look within the sector, there are few examples of scaled providers that have both the trust and credibility, but the data set that can really take advantage of this. So as you'll know, most clinical interactions happen within four walls, and rather than through that text-based interactions, we have the record of every interaction that our users have with our practitioners. And so what are we then looking to do with that? So it's really about three elements. It's about enhancing our user engagement, so making sure that they find the things that they need to in the platform, that things are served up that will be most useful to them, that we also can manage our platform in the most efficient way. So we are recognizing any risk or moderation requirements more quickly and more efficiently. And as we move towards Class 2A MHRA accreditation in the UK, doing that alongside that. And then again, as I said, it's about how do we improve the outcomes, the clinical outcomes and the functional outcomes that our users receive through delivering that. And we truly believe that that diversified AI strategy can deliver more outcomes at scale than just our digital model alone. And one example of that is about how we train and audit our practitioners. So we do that already. We have done that for years. It's a key part of our piece. We employ and train and audit all of our practitioners. And that's something that they really value from us because they can learn with us. And typically we'll do that on a kind of biannual basis, and that will be according to our clinical governance model, using our the text-based interaction that we'll be having and having a look at how that sits alongside our clinical governance model. And now with the application of AI, we can now do that in real time. And we can be serving up supportive training application to our practitioners on a bi-weekly basis. And again, thinking about how that can enhance the outcomes of those on our platform is really game-changing.
Many thanks for joining me today. Fascinating conversation.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Sanjay, many thanks for coming in today. Can you start by discussing your financial performance in 2025? Revenues were slightly down, but there's a lot of investment in growth going on behind the covers, and there's also currency movements there. Can you just run us through the key moving parts in the financials?
Sure. Well, look, 2025, as Kate would have indicated, was a year of a bit of consolidation for us, coming off some very strong results in 24 when revenues doubled, and we saw significant EBITDA, 15.8 million sterling. And so in that context, 25, it was, we saw revenue slip back a little bit to 63.3 million sterling. Around half of that 3.4 million drop was FX related. We report in sterling. 75% of our revenues are dollar denominated, and obviously, as everyone knows, sterling appreciated against the dollar last year. And we do have a bit of a natural hedge because about 50% of our costs are also sterling denominated, but that accounted for around half of the fall. And then the remainder was really related to our California contract. And that's a 4-year contract. And our clients effectively funded the development of our Soluna platform in California, contributing around $25 to $30 million to that. And as we moved into year 3 of the contract, those product development revenues have started to fall off. That was essentially the difference that we're seeing there. But what I think that does mask, however, is New Jersey was a new client last year. That contributed 1.1 million sterling to revenues last year. The benefit of that was offset by some UK churn, predominantly churn that we saw in 24, because in 25, it had sort of slowed down. And effectively, you're seeing the full impact of not having those clients in 25.
Get you. And then looking ahead, what are the key margin sort of levers in terms of margins going forward? You've said that you expect gross margins to stabilize in the sort of mid-70s.
Yeah.
Can you discuss the factors influencing that, and then the drop through to the operating level? What are the key levers there?
Yeah, great. So our direct costs typically are the costs of our practitioners delivering the coaching and counselling services. around 250 staff. And those staff are all employed by us. They're not contractors. We're not running any kind of gig economy. That's really important to us because it means, we can ensure they have proper careers. We look after training, safeguarding, audit processes as well. So they're a key part of the direct costs. And then in addition to that, within direct costs, we have our direct media spend in California. We don't typically split that out on other contracts because we typically have a bundled revenue number from most of our other contracts. But in California, the marketing revenue is split out. So we take the media spend into costs of sales. And we accelerated that last year to drive registrations in California to get a sort of critical mass of users. And that helped the gross margin, helps probably the wrong word, but it reduced the gross margin by about 3 or 4 percentage points last year to 73.5%. That marketing spend will continue, but I expect it to drop back. We like to think that we're seeing a flywheel effect of the more users we get on the platform, we start to see organic growth because they start telling their friends about it, for example, and that allows us to rein in some of the marketing expenditure. But typically what you'll then see is perhaps some of the delivery costs go up as we see more usage of the professional support. So medium term, we expect gross margin to settle at around 75%.
And you've been building out the client base, the US client base through the State Alliance model. You've won New Jersey and Michigan.
Yep.
And then, how should we expect new client wins there to flow through to the P&L?
It's a good question. We're now at this, we've got a very strong infrastructure platform, both in the UK and the US, and, they're very sort of fungible, I suppose. We've got product staff in the UK working on the US platform, for example, obviously all within sort of data privacy constraints. But with that infrastructure we now have in place, we are able to, two things. We're able to roll out pretty quickly. So New Jersey, we signed the contract December 24 and we went live in January 25. And Michigan, again, there was, probably about 6 weeks between contract signing and launching, soft launching that service. So it's not quite cookie cutter, but we can roll out pretty quickly. Typically what I'd expect to see in terms of flow through is if we assume the 25% direct costs continue on a client, and that's predominantly service delivery with that one exception I mentioned in California. In addition to that, we tend to put aside 10 to 15% of revenue for marketing and promotion and engagement, and that can either take the form of social media work, for example, but also we have feet on the street. So we have engagement staff who work for us. They're visiting schools. They're talking about Kooth at school assembly, encouraging kids to sort of sign up or take a look at the platform. And so if I look at the practitioner costs of around 25%, the marketing costs of say 15%, that's 40% of revenue. And generally I can add to that, account management, sales commissions, call that another 15% or so. So I'd like to think that between 40 and 45% of revenue now flows through to both cash and to EBITDA.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And you're cash generative, you're profitable,
Yep.
You've got no debt. Can you discuss your priorities in terms of capital allocation?
Yeah, great question. We finished last year with 22 million of cash on the balance sheet. We do have a working capital facility, but no debt. And I'd like to think that our working capital requirement is around 10 to 12 million. So I suppose arguably there's about 10 million of excess cash on the balance sheet. With the results announced last week, we've obviously met a whole range of investors, and it's a question that we talk about quite a lot. And the one extreme, I've sort of a couple of investors have said, well, there's a energy crisis on at the moment. You want to be keeping as much cash on your balance sheet as possible. And at the other end, we've got, at the current valuation, and given that you have share option plans in place for staff, doesn't it make sense to start buying back some shares? And we did a small buyback in quarter one of last year, about 1.5 million. And then somewhere in the middle, our thinking is very much around Should we be accelerating business development in the US, for example, which is a huge market and there's a lot of opportunity for us there. And we have investors who say, look, we invest in this business because you're a growth business and that's where we want you to focus your capital allocation. Or a little bit like the Kismet acquisition we made at the end of last year. We're starting to see really good businesses that were well funded perhaps during COVID. Maybe they've invested $10, $15 million into strong platforms, but then have had some challenges around revenue traction and perhaps are starting to run out of cash. And we've seen a few of those opportunities, low single millions in terms of potential cost. So some of that stuff is quite interesting as well. So what's been great is meeting investors on the roadshow. We're taking some of those soundings, and I think over the next sort of 2 or 3 months, we'll make some decisions around that.
As ever, a complete market of opinions to get your heads around.
Absolutely.
Sanjay, many thanks for joining me today.
Great. Thanks, Dan.